The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
On this week's show, or shows, I should say, we welcome back United States Congressman Dan Meuser from the 9th Congressional District. As you have heard many times, I'll briefly remind you of Dan's background and qualifications. This will be the Cliff Notes version. Dan's schooling and ultimately degree occurred at the State University of New York's Maritime College, where he received a Navy ROTC scholarship, as well as attendance at the prestigious Cornell University, an Ivy League institution. You'll remember he was in the cabinet of Pennsylvania Governor Tom Corbett, where he served as Secretary of Revenue. Dan was first elected to the U.S. Congress in 2018 and was subsequently re-elected 2 more times, most recently this past November to his 3rd term. Dan serves on numerous important committees in Congress, but for this show, we highlight his service on the Committee for Small Business, in addition to that, on the Financial Committee, which have an important impact on our country. He also, for the purposes of these shows, serves by appointment to a special caucus called the Border Security Caucus. He was appointed by Republican leadership, and it's a bipartisan caucus, including Democrats. This becomes the 2nd consecutive guest where 2 shows will be required to cover the material, and they will be aired over consecutive Sundays. The topics for discussion will include the infighting and compromise that produced the decisive vote electing Congressman Kevin McCarthy as the next Speaker of the House of Representatives of the United States. Other topics will include the debt ceiling controversy, the border crisis, and the possible impeachment of United States Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas, as well as the Biden administration's continued assault on American energy production, along with other topics. We hope you'll stay tuned and understand that when we break for this show, we'll be back again next Sunday with Dan to finish up these important and substantive topics.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial, the area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Dan, welcome to the Volpe Report.
Always a pleasure, Chuck.
Yeah, it really is. It is even more of a pleasure. I like to keep our viewing audience updated, and you've become the main spokesperson for this show of what's going on in the United States Congress, the People's House. And, of course, in today's show, we have you here talking about history that's breaking raw in front of our eyes. So your presence is, first appreciated by me, but your ability to tell our viewing audience what's going on, because we both know what's reported in the press is no longer what for most of my lifetime was the unvarnished truth. They save their opinion and their agenda for the editorial page, and that's their prerogative. Yeah. Well, that's not the case. Now, as you were well aware, opinion and agenda pushing is right in factual reporting. That's what it is. That's the world we live in. So you have tremendous insights. You were obviously there, firsthand witness to history in terms of, well, obviously we want to talk somewhat about why it took so many votes to get Kevin McCarthy elected Speaker. Yeah. You were in the highest chambers in closed-door meetings, like with Jim Jordan and others, that while this was unfolding. So the first question is, and you can take as much time as you need, talk about how that came about, why it wasn't just a slam dunk, he's the Speaker, and then move on, and what was at stake. So take it from there.
Well, it was certainly interesting, and I know a lot of folks in your audience and many friends and many of my constituents tuned in even late into the evening.
C-SPAN,
yeah, it is true. We had as many as, we had 15 votes, almost like I compared it to a 15-round heavyweight boxing match. and I actually said that to some of my colleagues on about the 9th round. I said, we might have to go the full 15 here.
Yeah, it's going to decision.
Some of them got it, some of them didn't.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah,
and
I'm old enough to get it.
Yeah.
It's going to the cards.
Yeah, right, exactly. So that's what occurred. You know, we did a tremendous amount of negotiation that we were all involved in conference and smaller caucuses individually. I mean, I had many conversations with our leadership, from Steve Scalise, who's a fantastic person, to Kevin McCarthy, who I was definitely supporting for good reason. And I had many constituents that were calling me, honestly, saying, we don't want McCarthy, we don't want this, we don't want that.
Wow.
He's not the leader we want. He's not conservative enough. And I will say this to my constituents who are very well versed and knowledgeable. A lot of the information, though, that was coming into me was just inaccurate, saying he voted for this in the past, he voted for that in the past. So there was some disinformation out there, sort of like a campaign against him. But anyway, so the problem was for me that we got through the negotiations, and as far as I was concerned, we were 97% of the way there, if not 100%. After, granted, after about the third or fourth ballot.
Right.
And so we were going back, fixing things up. And then at that point, there were about 20 left that were still voting no. And I was having conversations with about 3 or 4 of them. I mean, certainly Jim Jordan, who's a really good friend of mine.
Right.
That morning of, I was.
You were with him in his office.
I was with him for 45 minutes. Yeah. We were going through what the possible scenarios are, trying to war game it a little bit, who we could talk to. Scott Perry from Pennsylvania, he caught a lot of flack, but he played a really important role in all of this in getting it done. And so in the end, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but we aired everything out in quite a public manner, right? Which is a good thing. Right? There were
supposed to be that way.
There were differences, and they were shown on the House floor, and so what it really came down to in the end, though, in fact, my view, where I was starting to get a little frustrated, I thought it was a little selfish, where there were some special privileges being asked for along the way, and I don't want to hear about any of that. I'm about the greater good, and that's what we're supposed to be doing here. And I will say this about Kevin McCarthy: he handled it extremely well. He is a conservative. He's a very talented person. People have seen him up here.
I've seen him.
Yeah.
I met him with you privately. Yeah. I heard one of the best speeches I've heard in 10 years from him when we met him. So
he's hardworking. He's a patriot. I will say that in all due honor. And but what we've done is we've made him accountable. Everybody could use a little accountability, right? Even that person of the highest integrity. So we set some new rules that are in the interests of definitely our caucus, definitely our commitments, my commitments even to my constituents, but in the interests of the United States of America moving forward with a firmer grasp on what the plan is moving forward from fiscal responsibility to taxation to accountability to the type of bills that we want to come to the floor. So a lot of good things. Right. And in the end, I'll tell people, our Freedom Caucus. I'm not on the Freedom Caucus. I've discussed it a number of times. I vote with them probably 99% of the time. Not probably, that's an accurate number. But the Freedom Caucus wasn't seated on committees in the proportion that it should be, right? And so at first I was looking at that was special privilege. But at the end I said, no, you know what? We need more balance. They're very much right on this. And I shared that with now Speaker McCarthy. I shared that with others. I talked with some of my friends, Ralph Norman, Andy Biggs. I mean, these guys we're all friends. Lauren Boebert, we all talk. And you got to keep those relationships. Of course. It doesn't get personal. I don't even like making it personal with my Democrat colleagues. But anyway, in the end, it came together. It was close. We were tied. That last 14th vote was tied. Right. One person could have walked out and not voted. Right. One other person could have voted present, and it would have been done. Right. And we were this close to adjourning. Right. Anybody who stayed up to 1:30 in the morning saw this, the havoc. And then
I saw it the next day.
Some of the tussling that took place on the floor, and the handing of Marjorie Taylor Greene of DT on her phone. Literally, Donald Trump was said to Matt Gaetz, "Hey, come on, let's finish this." Yeah. I think you've won. Right. You've not just won, we've won. Right. right? It came together in a united way, and I think we're stronger for it. And that's when I was standing next to Kevin, Speaker McCarthy, and he said, we got to get the nose in. We don't want this to adjourn. Because literally, that's what happened. Gates came up to him and said, hey, let's vote one more time. And that's when the last 4 or 5 came over, voted present. Didn't vote for him, voted present.
Well, that's enough. Now back to your comments. We talked off camera, and I think it's worthy of putting on camera.
I'll add this real quickly.
Sure, please.
Democrats, when we started doing the pulling back the adjournment, some were yelling, hey, no, that's not fair. Others said, let's get this done. Settle down. Let them do it. And you know what? I thank many of them too. That really made a difference. That helped just move things along. It was settled. So in a way, it was almost a bipartisan coming together. In the end.
Well, let me make the analogy, and I think it's not only a fair one. I think it's absolutely a correct one. And we talked off camera about this before. The gauntlet you go through in a political campaign. You've gone through it several times. Obviously, our United States Congressman. I've gone through it several times, including statewide office. So, and it's not for the faint of heart, as you know.
That's for sure.
As a survivor, you bleed a lot. You find out things about you that you never heard before and aren't even true. Scurrilous accusations on primetime television news commercials attacking you. One had me hating old people. It's an amazing thing. So I told you about other, what I'll call hit pieces that they did, where they spring it on you like an ambush. But I'm one of, the few that think that's good. And here's why. It becomes a gauntlet you have to survive, true, very unfair and very difficult on your family, on you personally. It tests your character, your resolve, and your courage to survive it. But here's the point. It's necessary, I believe, in our process, because if you think after you actually win and get sworn in that it's going to be all sunshine and roses, that all that process does is prepare you for what you're going to have to deal with. So the analogy back to your comments is that prepared the Republican Party in the United States House. You're going to deal with tough, contentious, difficult issues with a small plurality. And you're all going to be tested, and your party came through it. I think you would agree stronger. And the outcome for Americans by the committee assignments and how the issues were resolved is going to be better, because we're going to get to delve into issues in this country we need to hear about, the press won't talk about.
No, I agree. And even this vacate the chair issue that you and I talked about earlier, and people here, look, that's existed up until Nancy Pelosi. That's been in our congressional rules since 1800. So one person can stand up and say, if they got the majority to vacate the chair, but Nancy Pelosi ended it. So you can understand maybe a new speaker wouldn't want to bring it back, particularly with a 3 or 4 vote majority. But nevertheless, it was agreed to, and it went from 5 to 1, and really no difference between 1 and 5, because you would need 5 of us Republicans to vote with the Democrats if they all wanted to throw them out. So anyway, even that is okay, and because of this has been aired out so much, less of an issue or a threat than it was before.
Now, specifically to you, your committee assignments and what role you can play as this Congress goes forward, your contribution to this picture. Go ahead.
Well, I'm going to be on financial services as well as small business committee.
That's big. It is. Small business is maybe one of the most important committees in Congress.
You know, it fits so well with my background, both in business, locally, revenue secretary. Financial services is so important. It's banking. It's oversight of the Fed. It's everything to do with our economy, oversight of the SEC.
Wow.
One of the things I'm going to be focused on there, we have a very overreaching SEC chairman right now, Gensler. What he's imposing ESG,
What's that?
Environmental and social and governmental restrictions. Green gas emission mandates on small banks, mid-sized banks, large banks, financial institutions, which really is hurting capital investment being made in the oil and gas and natural gas, overall energy industries, coal industries. So look, we're all environmentalists. Of course we are, right? We're conservationists. But what those are, when I say overreach, those are unlawful regulations that he has no right to be imposing and honestly threatening on banks. So I'm going to work there, and that will definitely help American energy development, responsible American energy development. So that's one of the areas that I'm going to play a big role. The other is support of community banks. We've got lots of them, hundreds throughout Pennsylvania. We've got a great Pennsylvania Banking Association, so I'm going to be able to help there. And on the small business, as you said, I'm the small business advocate. I'm the small business representative, and I will likely be the. I'll have a gavel. I'll be the chairman of the subcommittee on taxation, economic growth, and access to capital.
No, you got great achievements. I know, well earned. And we talk a little bit about small business. I think people don't understand really. I know I didn't, and I've been around the block a few times, but I didn't quite understand. And I came to learn as I had to study for political office and otherwise, the importance of our economy and its growth to our country. And I found out the overwhelming driver of economic growth and gross national product in America is small business.
Absolutely.
Like over 60% of it is small business. So, everybody think it's the big corporations and big tech, and they're the ones that really drive the economy. No, yeah, it's nice, those small businesses on Main Street in Berwick, but no.
And they're the ones right now that are facing the most number of challenges, right? From workforce to wage increases. We all want wages to increase, but they're kind of skyrocketing, and they're because of the workforce shortages that exist. So they're dealing with that. Every small business I talk to, and I did a big tour 2 days ago in Tunkhannock, visited 5 or 6 different businesses, did the same in Williamsport. That's part of the new night that I represent. And they're under the gun. I mean, their sales are okay. Their margins are getting squeezed. Their hours, I mean, they tend to look a little haggard because they have work shortages and everything else, and inflation, energy costs. So they're really under the gun. So we've got to be their advocate. And you look at all the different committees in Congress and all. They don't really have that many that are fighting for them. They don't necessarily have an organization. I will tell you this though, like the Pennsylvania Chamber under now Luke Bernstein.
Right.
I was down in Harrisburg the other day. He's the best person we could ask for to be running that organization. So I'm looking forward to working hand in hand with him, but also the Wilkes-Barre Chamber. I got part of Luzerne County, not necessarily Wilkes-Barre, but a good portion of Luzerne County. Our Schuylkill Chamber, I was just at an event with them last night.
Wow.
We had a big opening of a new college town for Alvernia University that we were able to get funding for. So it's all about revitalization, jobs, small business.
Right.
I'm all about the district. I'm all about just making it better for people, for economically and quality of life. I mean, that's the job.
And it's a truism to say that it'll be a little easier to do those things in the majority than it was in the minority. Dan, it's, believe it or not, time for our first break. We're here today, of course, with United States Congressman Dan Meuser, who is enlightening all of us, me included, on the things you don't see on C-SPAN or read about in the New York Times. Because as we all know about politics, that's when those deals get done. So they're not on the floor usually. But at any rate, we're going to come back, and as I already said, we're going to do this show in 2 parts so you understand that the issues we're going to cover are of substance and honestly can't fit into the actual 22 minutes of tape time. It's a 30-minute show, but there's the open and my 4-minute view and all that. So we're not going to get it done then. And like already occurred, as you know, this show is succeeding a 2-part show where we had 2 of the top news journalists in the country on the show. So with them, it took 2 shows, and it will be with our congressman today. So at any rate, I have a view coming up I think you'll find, as usual, controversial, but hopefully enlightening. And no word comes out of my mouth that isn't verifiable and true. I think you know that about me. I learned that in law school. Never ask a question that goes that you don't already know the answer to. Well, anything I quote is verifiable and fact. Now, opinion on that may vary, but what you get from me will be true. So hopefully you'll enjoy the view. We'll be back. The next subject with Dan, that'll take some time again. He has a lot of nuance to explain. He did explain it to me off air on the debt ceiling that we're approaching crisis stage with. The issue with the debt ceiling, as you know, there's a lot of jockeying going on in politics. But if the debt service has to be resolved in a way, or obviously we can crash our markets, our economy, our bond ratings could go down, which would not be good for the country. So it's an important issue, and we'll be back after this message. Progressivism, otherwise known as the far left and militant wing of the Democratic Party, continue their forward march toward the socialization of America. They hide in plain sight and can often be found in gated communities, faculty lounges, DEI departments, big tech, and Hollywood. Their spurious scholarship and convoluted logic allows them to reason that the end justifies the means. But if you look hard enough, you will see their hypocrisy. For example, they advocate for an open border to allow as many genuinely persecuted, suffering people in, without taking into account the impact on border communities and the fact that they've opened the door to criminals and terrorists who prey on the suffering migrants to gain access, or provide an avenue for the drug cartels to get their drugs transported into the United States. Then there's the climate change zealots, who seem to think that our planet, which is 4.5 billion years old, is going to blow up in the next several decades due to weather-related events brought on by global warming. There is strong intellectual opinion that refutes that the climate apocalypse is nigh. This argument is like whether the glass is half empty or half full. I'd recommend reading the works of Dr. Stephen Koonin, a PhD in theoretical physics from MIT, founding director of NYU's Center for Urban Science and Progress, former professor and provost at Caltech, and the former Undersecretary for Science at the United States Department of Energy in the Obama administration. Progressives choose to ignore the collateral damage a zero-carbon policy causes, like the expensive and punitive costs that will be borne by American working families and the 60% of Americans that live paycheck to paycheck, like their heating bills and the cost of gas to get to work for those not rich enough to afford a Tesla. Progressives don't care that billions of tons of the Earth's crust will be dug up to mine for the materials that comprise electric car batteries, or that many hundreds of children will die in mining operations for cobalt, an essential ingredient in EVs. They are also ignorant of history, because undermining America's fossil fuel production has sent our NATO allies on bended knee to Vladimir Putin for their energy needs, as well as indirectly helping fund his war with Ukraine. Then we have the woke social justice warriors who protest on college campuses and infiltrate DEI departments to eradicate free speech and individuality through intimidation and canceling in the name of conformity. Then there's academia, those virtue-signaling paragons of conformity who are indoctrinating our young people on intellectually discredited concepts like critical race theory, gender ideology, postmodernism, and identity politics. I can go on, but you are getting the gist. The fallacy of modern progressivism is their belief that the end does justify the means. I beg to differ. That's not what I learned in ethics class. Welcome back. Again, we're here with our United States Congressman Dan Meuser, and I've already talked about, you already know what the question is. Talk to us about, I've told our audience a little bit about the importance of the debt ceiling to the country, to economic markets, to bond ratings, to our financial health, to the financial stability of the world economy, a factor we play a major factor in. So talk about the issue, because the brinksmanship that's already occurred under the Democrats for the last 2 years, they had the same issue, and now with you in the majority in the House, talk about the issue. First, explain what's at stake.
Well, real quick. When I came into Congress 4 years ago, just 4 years ago, the debt was, national debt, federal debt was $19.6 trillion. Now, yesterday, we hit $31.4 trillion, okay? So, a big problem. COVID was in that. So I was there, paying for a lot of the hospitals and the PPP and all the things that needed to be done because of the reaction we had to COVID, shutting everything down. The whole world largely did that.
Right.
So anyway, that was about $5 trillion. All right, and on top of that, we had regular deficits going of about $300 billion. So about $6 billion when President Biden comes in. Right. You'd think after that levels of excessive spending, and since we were on an economic upswing, which we absolutely were after COVID, we would at least have some spending restraint. Spending restraint. We never had more spending than ever before. I mean, even Obama in 8 years raised our debt by $8 billion.
Wow.
Joe Biden,
Yeah.
Joe Biden,
Yeah.
has raised it
Joe Biden. Okay.
$5 trillion in 2 years.
Right.
$5 trillion more in 2 years after the level of spending we just had. So here's the deal. So when they say, oh, we've hit our 31.4, we've hit our debt ceiling. It's the responsibility of Democrats and Republicans and all to pay these bills. Look, that's true. Even though I sure didn't vote for any of those excesses, because maybe it should have been another $1 trillion, sadly, in debt. Not $5 trillion, not $5.5 trillion, not the additional $1.5 trillion that they now want to add to it. And to make matters worse, they deliberately set that ceiling low at 31.4. And look, I don't want it higher, but when 5 plus 5 equals 10, and they tell the American people 5 plus 5 equals 7.
It's a lot.
Okay, it was a deliberate falsehood that this debt ceiling was going to get hit much earlier than they projected. I knew it. I gave a speech on the House floor. This debt ceiling, it's a falsehood. It should be at 33. That's why we've hit it already. That's why they're running into emergency measures. And here they're now. Even Joe Biden, I'm on the Biden thing, is telling us, oh, how dare the Republicans not pay America's bills? This is a not so merry-go-round, meaning that every year this occurs.
Right.
They overspend, and then they say, how dare you not live up to the debts that we, bringing us in, we into it, okay? And it's very similar to if you had a teenage child that overspent you gave them a credit card, hey, you got $1,000 balance, they spent $6,000. Right. You're not going to say, you have to pay it.
Right.
I get that. But you stop it from happening.
Right.
All we're looking at doing in this is saying we're going to pay the debt, but we're not going to continue this, as I call it, not so merry-go-round, right? Because we're driving ourselves into deficit and debt oblivion. Right. And then meanwhile, you got the media talking about this like, oh, Republicans, how dare they, right? And that's where I came up with my new joke on the media. How many in mainstream media does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is none. The answer is none. Joe Biden tells them it's fixed, and they all applaud in the dark.
Look, you have had some of the best quips on this show. I remember vividly the one about wake up and woke down, which should have been a Republican red bumper sticker. As predicted, Dan, we've already hit our limit for the show. Our time limit has run, and which is why we need 2 shows, because we still have a whole bunch of issues to discuss. And we'll come back in part 2 the following Sunday. We're going to pick up a little more on the debt ceiling, because we got a lot of it, but we need a little more. So with your indulgence, we are going to end part 1 of the Volpe report with Dan now. But as you already know, it's going to be a 2-part show. So this seems like an appropriate break time to take a breath, and so we can start fresh for the following week's show with a full half hour to get into the issues. We haven't even talked about, Dan, Secretary Mayorkas, and we haven't even talked about some of the investigative committees the Republicans now in the majority are going to be endeavoring to investigate. Yeah. So bunch of stuff left to go. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll be back next week with Dan talking about the issues we still need to get to. Thank you for watching.